Welcome to the Defense and Aerospace Report podcast. I'm your host, Vago Muradian. Our podcast is brought to you by Bell. Since 1935, Bell has been redefining flight. Learn more about its pioneering spirit at bellflight.com. Had the coronavirus pandemic not intervened, we would have been in Tampa this week for the National Defense Industrial Association's annual vSOFIC, the #1 global gathering of special operators for this year's conference and trade show. The show this year will be virtual, dubbed vSOFIC, and joining us now is Jim Smith, the acquisition executive for the U.S. Special Operations Command. And I should also point out that our virtual coverage is sponsored by Elbit Systems of America and Leonardo DRS. Sir, thanks so much for joining us.
It's great to be on your podcast, Vago. It's been a couple of years since you and I have had a chance to talk, but I do listen to your podcast, and I really appreciate this opportunity to speak on behalf of Special Operations Command.
Thanks very much, sir. We're honored you are taking time to spend with us listening, and glad to hear that it's of value. Let's start out with how COVID-19 is impacting your operation. Obviously, everybody is struggling with this, from average Americans and across the military. I know that Secretary Esper is working with his senior team to figure out how to lighten travel restrictions. And the challenge you guys have as a community is that you're continuing to deliver on worldwide operations while also preparing for the future. It's a challenge every acquisition executive is working on as we transition from Iraq and Afghanistan to great power competition. Talk to us a little bit about how you guys are managing your team and continuing to deliver.
Yeah, no, thanks. If you had asked me a couple of months ago how we would all have adapted to this new environment, I think I would have questioned our ability to adapt to teleworking and to virtual teleconferences and using chat and IM as a primary means of communication. And I got to tell you, the workforce and our industry partners have exceeded, what would have been my expectations by a far shot. We've all adapted, I think, to the new normal, if you will, really well. And I think that's important. I think, there are a lot of stresses out there on the economy right now. There's a lot of stresses out there on the population. And the role that we've tried to play here at SOCOM, but I think in the defense industry base as a larger subset, is to bring some normalcy. We've got the wherewithal, we've got the capability, and to try to maintain normalcy as much as possible. And what I've talked about to the workforce and to our industry partners is, first of all, delete the word cancel from your lexicon. I think a lot of folks' first reaction to the COVID-19 was that it might be temporary. And so we can't do that. We're going to cancel that event. We're going to postpone that event. And we've had folks kind of take that out of their lexicon so that we could focus on trying to maintain normalcy and doing the things that we said we were going to do on schedule. I think that's been a really important. We struck on that early on, and I think it's served us well over the last 8 weeks or so. The other thing we've done is we knew this would really put a stress on mainly our small business partners, but also I think to a certain extent our large business partners as well. And so we quickly went out and we did we've been doing actually town halls with our industry partners. And it's been an interesting social experiment, because where you would expect you'd get a lot of questions in these town halls, virtual town halls, on when's the next solicitation coming out, and kind of the tactical edge of what's going on with COVID-19. I've actually seen a lot more comments sharing lessons learned, at a community perspective of how they're coping with this pandemic. So that's been helpful. And I've also been doing a lot more phone calls with our industry partners. And I'll tell you, that's been illustrative as well. I had one industry partner I was talking to, a senior VP, and she told me, at the senior VP level, she told me, hey, I'm having trouble getting a couple of my engineers access to one of your bases to finish up some testing they're supposed to be doing. And a couple of quick phone calls, and we got their engineers access, and we were able to keep things kind of as close to normal as possible. And I could give you a vignette after vignette of our industry partners, warning us that they had a problem on a production line, and they might have to shut down for 2 weeks, and then coming back up online in 5 days. So just phenomenal partnership across the board.
Let's talk a little bit about this year's show. All of your PEOs are going to be participating. There are going to be video chats across the course of the week. The title is Expanding the Space. Talk to us a little bit about some of the messages we're going to hear from your team and what they need from industry, because one of the great things about this show and how you guys in particular at SOCOM operate is to try to get as much as possible that's already been developed and available, whether it's through elsewhere in the industrial base, whether it resides in the military services, or whether it resides with allies.
No, absolutely. I think, one of the things about virtual SOFIC is, and again, this kind of goes back to the previous conversation, how do you maintain things as normal? For obvious reasons, we had to cancel the traditional SOFIC, in the convention center, here in Tampa, and we're disappointed to do that. But we quickly, on that decision, quickly spun around and said, okay, how can we reformat this in a virtual? Would that be useful to us? Would that be useful to industry? And I think the answer is going to be yes. It's a little bit of an experiment for us right now, but we're looking forward to the experiment. We're really motivated by what impact, again, we can have on the economy. We're always motivated by taking the resources that we get and turning that into capability and getting that out to special operators. This year, you kind of have the additional motivation of SOCOM is going to spend about $7 billion this year on equipment and services. That's a lot of money to get back into the economy. That's our one, our one contribution, but I think it's a significant contribution to kind of helping out the economy. So there's, the workforce has kind of got an additional motivation right now to keep things as normal and moving forward as possible. So doing the virtual SOFIC is part of that. And I think, as you know, what's always made SOFIC a little bit of a unique venue is that, we spend as much time at SOFIC trying to take advantage of the fact that you've got, thousands of people together, trying to get those multi-variable conversations going. In other words, there's a lot of conferences you go to where people on a stage speak to the audience and you listen to a series of speakers, and it's a very one-way conversation. SOFIC has always been more about the two-way or multi-way conversations that can occur in that environment. So how do you recapture that in a virtual format? And I think we'll see some of that from the agenda that we've made great efforts to, between question and answer periods, question and answer panels, and 1v1 or one-on-one conversations with industry partners. We've tried to recapture that. What do we need from industry? It's a great question. As you stated, we're reacting to the National Defense Strategy from 2018. I'd argue that from an acquisition standpoint, we had already largely made the effort to focus on near peer competition with some of our more major acquisition programs. If you think about radio frequency countermeasures, or our dry combat submersible, or our terrain following, terrain avoidance radar, those systems are all our major acquisition programs, and they are all really focused on near peer competition. A threat that has the capability to try to deny our access, or limit our communications, or take away our ability to navigate. All those things are why we've got those systems in place to take on a more sophisticated threat. From an industry standpoint, we're looking for those things that will continue to enable us to have access and influence. And I'll kind of break those out, but we need to have, the country expects our special operation forces to get to the place they need to be when they need to get there. And that's regardless of whether it's, a near peer environment or not. So, much of the hardware we're looking for, it falls in that domain. Next generation mobility, precision fires and effects, data and networks. And that really gets us into access. And then once the SOF is on the ground, once the SOF has access, influence. So access and influence. And that's really an important shift for, I think, the command overall, is this idea of how do we have more effect in the influence space, specifically in the cyber domain, in the web domain, in the internet domain. How do we take a lot of the great efforts that America is a leader on, between artificial intelligence, machine learning, data analytics, and how do we take those great technologies and put them into our capabilities to provide even greater efficiencies and effectiveness for our SOF operators. So you'll see a theme for this conference of an emphasis on maybe some of those non-traditional commercial partners that maybe haven't attended SOFIC in the past, but we're trying to use this virtual format to open the tent even wider to get some of those, quote unquote, Silicon Valley type of entities welcomed.
Are you still getting those urgent requirements for the force? And what are some of those urgent requirements, right? As you're focusing on the future, as everybody is, you also have to do a lot of today stuff. You're not getting nearly as many things, but are you still getting some requests for urgent requirements?
Yeah, that has toned down a little bit, but as you can imagine, most of the urgent, and again, this is one of those things where I think people need to realize that when we talk about near-peer competition, we're not talking about something that we're planning for in the future. We're seeing it right now. As we operate, well away from what you would consider a near-peer country on the peripherals. We're still seeing, we're side by side with a lot of those near-peer countries that have the same interest that we do in those peripheral areas. And so today we're seeing jamming. We're seeing communications being disrupted. And so most of the things that we're working on today, I think, have applicability to tomorrow as well. And that is ensuring that our equipment has the ability to communicate. It's got assured communications, despite the environment it's working in, the dirty electromagnetic spectrum it's working in. It has the ability to communicate, to navigate, so those are really the things that we're working on right now today that I think are also very applicable to tomorrow.
I want to get to a speed question, but how is COVID-19 going to change some requirements for the force and their needs? Special operators are in a unique condition because they are engaged up close and personal in partnership training, but also operational settings around the world where there are concerns about the disease. And also this is reinvigorated thinking about biological defense in a lot of ways, because there can be things that are accidental, and then there can be things that are intentional that could really have devastating effects, right? An aircraft carrier was just sidelined not because of a hypersonic missile, but because of a virus. How is that do you guys have a requirement for this? And what are some of the things you're going to do for the force?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think you're familiar with the idea of soft peculiar, those equipment and services that are unique to special operations are the things that we work on. By legislation, those are the things that we work on here at USSOCOM and are resourced to do. Those things that are peculiar to SOF. If it's done by a service, then we default to the service lead. Although that's when General Clark, as the commander of a combatant command, puts on his combatant command hat and says, as USSOCOM Commander Services, I have a requirement for these types of things. So I personally am not doing a lot of work today on what you would consider, personal protective gear, mainly from the standpoint it's really not soft peculiar. Every soldier, airman, and sailor has a similar requirement. So we are putting a demand signal back on the services for that type of equipment. But as you stated, we're putting a very heavy demand signal because our operators do have a tendency to be forward deployed, remote locations, so austere locations. The ability to do primary care for some of our operators is a little bit more distant than it would be for a more traditional soldier. So we're putting a demand signal out there. I'll give you one, I think, interesting example. We have a piece of equipment called the Mobile Technology Repair Complex. It's a pejoratively called a shop in a box. Maybe not pejoratively, but it's called a shop in a box. It's a lathe, a drill press, a sewing machine, and a 3D printer, all in a box with the electricity, et cetera, to run it, and more importantly, the technicians, the engineer and the technician to run the equipment. And we put these MTRCs out in the battle space with our 4 deployed units. Very recently, one of these MTRCs fabricated with a 3D printer a Y connector that greatly, what it essentially did was allow that unit to operate with a far more robust ventilator capacity than was previously available to them. So as everyone's talking about the need for ventilators in this domain, we are using some of our organic assets to shop in a box, develop some equipment that is greatly increasing our capacity to withstand and treat our operators.
Let me ask you about acquisition speed. The last 20 years have been illustrative as to what's the art of the possible to get equipment into the hands of troops as quickly as possible. What are some of the enduring lessons about how you in your command are working? Your predecessor, Hondo Gertz, is now the Navy acquisition executive, where he's trying to bring a little bit of that soft magic. And each of the services, as well as DoD, are talking about speed as well. What are some of the clarion lessons about speed and getting it right fast instead of moving fast and making a lot of mistakes in the process?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I like the way you asked it, because that's the art of acquisition, is trying to find the balance between fast and right. I don't think any of us expect our nuclear programs or our space programs to go fast at the expense of right. We have a lot of advantages in U.S. SOCOM, and it extends far beyond the acquisition community. We have a very flat chain of command, and so I think the first advantage that we have is scale. To do acquisition right, you need to have a really tight marriage between the resources, the ability to approve resources, the ability to move resources, the ability to adjust when things change. You have to have the ability to validate and generate and validate requirements or capability needs. And then you've got to have the ability to put things on contract and develop things. And so our flat command structure here and our relatively small scale makes those 3 circles move in concert with a lot more harmony, and I think a lot less friction than you would see in the services. The services just orders of magnitude larger than U.S. SOCOM. So we get a lot of credit, I think, but it's mainly based on the scale. There are 2 enduring ones that I think are really important. The first is incorporating the voice of the operator. No one would disagree that we have the world's finest special operators. And one of the things that we can always instill on our new employees as they're coming in is to listen to the voice of the operator. It's not a secret that our operators are typically, older. They've gone through greater training. They typically have more deployments under their belt. The soft environment often leads to more education. So you get these very technically astute operators, and you got to incorporate them in the process early, often, and always. And I think the other piece that I think is an enduring one, and the great Hondo Gertz would certainly agree with this, is empowering people. Ensuring that people know that it's okay to take some risks if they're well managed risks, that you have their back if they stumble, and that you're expecting them to do everything in the best interest of the operator. And sometimes mistakes are going to get made, and when mistakes get made, you've got their back. And I think it's really important that your culture incorporates that. But I do want to say this is not in any way to draw a distinction between the people that work on acquisition in the combatant command versus the people that work on acquisition in the services. In fact, your listeners may not know, we have an extremely small acquisition workforce here, and we cannot accomplish the things we're asked to accomplish without the services. So, when I mentioned radio frequency countermeasures before, we are doing that completely in step with the United States Air Force. using their labs, using their engineers to make that program advance. And that program's going really well, and we needed the Air Force to help us do that. Same goes with our undersea program in the maritime domain. We've got great support from the Navy Yard on ensuring that that our undersea craft are safe from an engineering perspective and suitable for operation with the Navy line ships. And then, you know, just to kind of round it out, you know, rotary wing aircraft are extremely important to SOF capabilities. We are hand in hand working with the Army on their future vertical lift program. And again, we couldn't do that without the deep technical expertise that the Army brings to the rotary wing fight and cooperation with them. So, you know, really important, you know, the folks that work on SOF acquisition are the same DNA of the folks that work on service acquisition. You know, we are all trying to do the right thing. And it's important that, you know, we have a collaborative team fight to get after the technologies we're going to need to be relevant in the next conflict.
Sir, thanks so much for spending so much of your time with us. We know how busy you are. Thanks very much again, and look forward to talking a lot more regularly. You're absolutely right. It's been way too long, and we look forward to engaging with your PEOs. You've got really an incredible team of professionals there, and it's going to be a pleasure connecting with them as well over the course of the next week or two. Thanks so much again.
Oh, thank you so much. And yeah, I look forward to hopefully maybe next year in Tampa, we'll see you. But no, thanks for your time today. And stay well.
Thanks for joining us. Please follow our daily interviews with top government, military, industry, and thought leaders at Defense and Aerospace Report, and subscribe to our weekly newsletter. Follow us on Twitter at DEFAERO Report. That's at DEFAERO Report. Like us on Facebook at Defense and Aerospace Report, and check us out on LinkedIn. Check out our weekly cyber report sponsored by Northrop Grumman and our broader Navy coverage that's sponsored by Fincantieri Marinette Marine. Thanks again to Bell for their generous sponsorship, and we'll see you again tomorrow.